The Valdrani Star Empire had elevated conquest to the level of high art, which was either the most sophisticated approach to galactic domination ever devised, or the most expensive way to intimidate civilizations into submission, depending on your perspective on military theater budgets. For 3 centuries, the Valdrani had perfected what they called psychological warfare through aesthetic excellence, a doctrine that treated every invasion as a carefully choreographed performance designed to break enemy morale through sheer dramatic, overwhelming. Supreme Commander Vorthak stood as the Empire's premier practitioner of this martial art form. He had orchestrated 41 successful conquests, each one a masterpiece of theatrical intimidation that reduced entire civilizations to terrified submission without firing a single shot. His secret lay in understanding that fear was fundamentally an aesthetic experience. Properly presented, overwhelming force could achieve what mere firepower never could. The Valdrani approach differed radically from the crude military doctrines employed by lesser empires, where other civilizations relied on simple demonstrations of destructive capability. The Valdrani created immersive experiences that attacked the psychological foundations of resistance itself. Their conquest fleets were designed not merely for tactical effectiveness, but for maximum visual and emotional impact. Every ship was a work of art, every formation a statement about the futility of opposing Valdrani will. Commander Vorthak's flagship, the Aesthetic Inevitability, exemplified this philosophy. The vessel was simultaneously a dreadnought capable of reducing planets to cosmic debris, and a floating cathedral dedicated to the sublime terror of superior force. Its hull was crafted from materials that seemed to absorb light, while radiating an aura of inexorable doom. When positioned correctly relative to a target world's primary star, the ship created shadow effects that could plunge entire continents into psychological twilight. The Empire's conquest methodology had been refined through extensive field testing and cultural analysis. Phase 1 involved comprehensive artistic reconnaissance. Valdrani cultural analysts would study target civilizations for months, identifying their deepest aesthetic fears and psychological vulnerabilities. Phase 2 deployed carefully designed intimidation scenarios that exploited these weaknesses through sophisticated theatrical presentation. Phase 3 delivered formal surrender demands through elaborate ceremonial protocols that reinforced the futility of resistance. The entire process was designed to make conquest feel like an inevitable artistic conclusion, rather than a military defeat. What made this approach particularly effective was its psychological precision. The Valdrani had discovered that most civilizations possessed deep-seated fears of cosmic insignificance that could be triggered through properly staged displays of overwhelming power. By presenting conquest as an aesthetic experience rather than a military operation, they bypassed rational strategic thinking and attacked the emotional foundations of resistance. The intelligence files for target classification Omega-7, locally designated Earth, had provided what seemed like perfect material for another masterful conquest. The preliminary cultural analysis painted humanity as a species obsessed with dramatic entertainment, suggesting they would be particularly susceptible to theatrical intimidation. Their media productions were filled with invasion scenarios that invariably ended in either heroic last stands or inevitable surrender, perfect templates for Valdrani manipulation. The anthropological reports had been particularly encouraging. Human entertainment appeared to demonstrate a deep fascination with overwhelming odds and dramatic reversals, suggesting a species that understood the aesthetic power of superior force. Their fictional invasions always featured elaborate displays of alien technological superiority, dramatic ultimatums, and carefully staged demonstrations of destructive capability. It was as if they had been preparing themselves psychologically for exactly the kind of conquest the Valdrani specialized in. Most promising was the human concept of suspension of disbelief, their apparent willingness to accept dramatic premises for the sake of emotional engagement. The cultural analysts had interpreted this as evidence that humans could be manipulated through theatrical presentation, their rational faculties overwhelmed by properly staged aesthetic experiences. The fleet that assembled at the edge of the Sol system represented 3 months of careful artistic preparation. 27 vessels arranged in formation Omega, a configuration designed to create maximum visual impact when viewed from the target planet. Each ship had been positioned to catch and reflect the system's stellar radiation in patterns that would appear both beautiful and terrifying to human observers. The formation itself told a story of inevitable conquest through its geometric progression from distant threat to immediate presence. Commander Vorthak had spent weeks perfecting the dramatic elements of the encounter. The lighting effects alone had required consultation with the Empire's finest theatrical designers. The ship's approach vectors had been calculated not merely for tactical advantage, but for maximum psychological impact. Humanity would watch their doom approach with the inexorable beauty of a cosmic ballet. The surrender demand itself was a work of art, refined through 4 decades of successful conquests. The document combined legal precision with poetic eloquence, each phrase designed to reinforce the aesthetic inevitability of Valdrani victory. The presentation would be accompanied by carefully choreographed visual displays that demonstrated both the Empire's technological superiority and humanity's cosmic insignificance. When the human delegation requested permission to come aboard for formal negotiations, Commander Vorthak felt the familiar satisfaction of another conquest, proceeding according to artistic plan. The humans were following the script perfectly. They understood the importance of proper theatrical protocol and were requesting the privilege of participating in their own dramatic surrender. The delegation that arrived consisted of 5 individuals, led by someone who introduced herself as Dr. Phoenix Castellanos of the Terran Cultural Exchange Office. She was a woman of perhaps 50 Earth years, with intelligent eyes and an expression that suggested she was observing everything with the attention of a professional critic. Her first words established exactly the tone Vorthak had hoped for. "Commander Vorthak, thank you for inviting us aboard. This is absolutely extraordinary. The artistic achievement represented by your fleet is genuinely breathtaking. The visual composition alone must have required months of planning." Perfect. The human was demonstrating proper appreciation for Valdrani aesthetic excellence. Vorthak activated the holographic presentation system and began the carefully choreographed surrender demand. The images were spectacular, previous conquests rendered in sweeping cinematic detail, the artistic progression of Valdrani expansion across the galaxy, and the sublime beauty of civilizations that had chosen integration over destruction. "As you observe," Vorthak declared, his voice pitched for maximum dramatic resonance, "the Valdrani Star Empire represents the aesthetic culmination of galactic civilization. We offer worlds the opportunity to participate in this sublime evolution, to transcend their primitive limitations and join something magnificent. Those who choose isolation," he gestured to images of planets whose refusal to surrender had necessitated artistic destruction, "their tragedy becomes part of our greater composition." The human delegation watched with rapt attention, occasionally exchanging glances that Vorthak interpreted as the expected mixture of awe and growing acceptance of inevitable surrender. When the presentation concluded, Dr. Castellanos nodded with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "Commander, that was absolutely magnificent. The production values are extraordinary. The cinematography, the musical scoring, the dramatic pacing. It's clear that enormous artistic resources went into creating this presentation. I'm particularly impressed by the way you've managed to make Conquest feel like an inevitable aesthetic conclusion rather than a military defeat." Vorthak felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction. The human was demonstrating exactly the kind of cultural sophistication that made conquest through aesthetic means so rewarding. "Thank you, Dr. Castellanos. We believe that true power expresses itself through beauty rather than mere force." "Oh, absolutely," Castellanos agreed enthusiastically. "And the theatrical elements are brilliant. The way you've staged this entire encounter, the dramatic lighting, the carefully choreographed ship formations. It's like being invited to participate in an epic space opera. The production design alone must have cost more than most civilizations' entire military budgets." Something in her tone made Vorthak pause slightly. "You find our approach aesthetically satisfying?" "Tremendously so," Castellanos confirmed. "From a purely artistic perspective, this is probably the most sophisticated invasion production I've ever seen. The attention to detail is remarkable. You've thought of everything from costume design to atmospheric effects. It's clearly the work of master theatrical artists. The other members of the human delegation were nodding enthusiastically, their expressions suggesting deep appreciation for artistic excellence. Vorthak felt a moment of uncertainty. Their responses were perfect, but something about their enthusiasm seemed slightly off. "I am pleased that you appreciate our aesthetic achievements," he said carefully. "This brings us to the formal aspect of our encounter." He activated the surrender ultimatum, which appeared as an elaborately illustrated holographic document, accompanied by dramatic musical accompaniment. "Dr. Castellanos, the Valdrani Star Empire hereby extends an invitation for humanity to join our galactic composition. You have 72 standard time units to consider this offer and prepare your formal acceptance. Should you choose artistic isolation, we will be required to demonstrate the aesthetic consequences of that decision." This was the moment when something unprecedented occurred in Commander Vorthak's career. Instead of the expected response, thoughtful consideration followed by inevitable acceptance, Dr. Castellanos' expression shifted into something that the Valdrani cultural analysis had completely failed to predict. The human's face contorted into what appeared to be some form of physical distress, accompanied by rhythmic vocalizations that the ship's translation systems struggled to categorize. The sound grew in intensity and was soon joined by similar responses from the entire human delegation. 72 hours to accept an invitation to join your galactic composition? Castellanos managed between bursts of what the computer finally identified as laughter. "Commander, that's absolutely perfect. You've managed to turn even the surrender ultimatum into performance art." Commander Vorthak experienced something that had never occurred during his 41 previous conquests: complete aesthetic confusion. "Dr. Castellanos, I'm afraid I don't understand your response. Are you finding our invitation amusing?" "Hilariously so," Castellanos confirmed, wiping moisture from her eyes. "Commander, do you have any idea how long we've been waiting for someone to invade us with this level of artistic sophistication? This is like every science fiction epic we've ever produced, except with production values that put our entertainment industry to shame." The commander's aide, cultural coordinator Nextil Praxis, was making small keening sounds that indicated severe aesthetic distress. Several bridge officers had abandoned their stations to stare at the human delegation with expressions of profound artistic confusion. "You have been waiting for our invasion?" Vorthak asked carefully. "Eagerly anticipating it," Castellano confirmed. "Ever since your scouts made contact, our entertainment industry has been analyzing your conquest methodology. We've held conferences, written academic papers, and produced detailed studies of Valdrani theatrical techniques. This is the most sophisticated example of invasion as performance art that we've ever encountered." The human to her left, a man with graying hair, nodded enthusiastically. "The level of artistic integration is remarkable. You've managed to make military conquest feel like participating in an immersive theatrical experience. The way you've blended intimidation with aesthetic appreciation is genuinely innovative." Commander Vorthak stared at the human delegation, his artistic certainty beginning to crumble like a poorly constructed dramatic climax. "You are studying our conquest techniques extensively," Castellanos confirmed. "We've obtained detailed records of your previous performances through cultural exchange programs with 12 of your target civilizations." "Fascinating material. The consistency of your artistic vision across such diverse species and planetary environments suggests a sophisticated understanding of universal aesthetic principles. But if you understand our artistic superiority, then surely you comprehend the futility of resistance?" "We understand the brilliance of your artistic methodology," Castellanos corrected. "But we also understand its fundamental limitation from a entertainment perspective." Vorthak felt cosmic forces shifting around him like unstable stage lighting. "Limitation? Your entire approach depends on the audience responding to aesthetic intimidation with surrender," Castellanos explained patiently. "You've created a perfect system for conquering civilizations that experience fear as a rational response to overwhelming artistic presentation. But what happens when you encounter a species that responds to overwhelming artistic presentation with appreciation and critique?" The commander's aide was now making sounds that suggested complete aesthetic breakdown. Half the bridge crew was watching the conversation with expressions that indicated their understanding of dramatic inevitability was undergoing fundamental revision. All civilizations respond to superior aesthetic force, Vorthak protested. It is a universal principle of artistic dominance. Actually, it's not, Castellanos said with obvious satisfaction. It's a statistical norm among species that haven't developed sophisticated entertainment industries. But we're what you might call experienced audiences. Experienced audiences? A civilization that has spent centuries perfecting the art of creating and consuming dramatic entertainment, the grey-hailed human explained. We've seen every possible variation of the invasion scenario, analyzed every technique for creating dramatic tension, and developed sophisticated appreciation for artistic excellence in all its forms, including conquest art, Castellanos added. We have entire academic disciplines dedicated to the study of warfare as performance, intimidation as theater, and the aesthetics of power projection. From our perspective, you're not invading us, you're performing for us. Commander Vorthak's worldview continued its catastrophic reconstruction. You see our conquest as entertainment, as the most sophisticated piece of invasion theater we've ever experienced, Castellanos confirmed. The production values are extraordinary, the dramatic pacing is perfect, and the artistic integration of military power with aesthetic presentation is genuinely innovative. We're honored to be your audience. But you are not our audience, Vorthak said desperately. You are our conquest target. Why can't we be both? Castellanos asked reasonably. The best theatrical experiences involve audience participation, and right now, we're participating by providing you with the most appreciative and knowledgeable audience you've ever performed for. The human delegation was still producing those strange rhythmic sounds, and Commander Vorthak realized that his carefully orchestrated conquest was somehow transforming into something resembling a performance review. What are you saying? We're saying that your artistic achievement deserves proper recognition, Castellanos announced. This is genuinely brilliant work. The ship design, the formation choreography, the dramatic timing, the presentation technology. You've elevated military intimidation to the level of high art. Therefore, you will surrender. Therefore, we're going to give you the most detailed artistic critique and appreciation that your work has ever received, Castellanos said with obvious delight. We want to discuss your aesthetic choices, analyze your dramatic techniques, and provide constructive feedback on your performance methodologies. Cultural coordinator Praxis had progressed from keening to what appeared to be catatonic staring. 3/4 of the bridge crew was now watching the conversation, with expressions that suggested their understanding of Conquest as art was collapsing in real time. You wish to critique our Conquest methodology? Vorthak asked weakly. We wish to celebrate it, Castellanos corrected. Commander, when was the last time you performed for an audience that truly understood and appreciated the sophistication of your artistic work? When did you last receive detailed feedback from critics who could properly analyze your techniques? Never, Vorthak admitted. Previous civilizations have typically surrendered before providing aesthetic commentary. Exactly, Castellanos said with satisfaction. You've been performing magnificent art for audiences that were too terrified to properly appreciate your achievements. That's tragic from an artistic perspective. What's the point of creating sublime aesthetic experiences if nobody can properly evaluate them? But the point is conquest, not artistic appreciation. But conquest through aesthetic means requires aesthetic appreciation to be truly successful, the grey-haired human pointed out. How can you know if your artistic techniques are achieving maximum effect if your audience surrenders before providing proper feedback? Commander Vorthak realized that the humans had somehow transformed his conquest presentation into what appeared to be an artistic workshop. You want to provide feedback on our invasion performance? We want to give you the artistic recognition your work deserves, Castellano said simply. This level of aesthetic achievement shouldn't go unrecognized. You've created something genuinely beautiful here, a perfect fusion of military power and artistic expression. But our objective is your surrender, not your artistic appreciation. Why can't your objective be both? Castellanos asked. The best art achieves multiple goals simultaneously. You could conquer us and receive the kind of detailed artistic critique that would help you refine your techniques for future performances. The Admiral stared at the human delegation, realizing that somehow his position had shifted from conqueror to performer, awaiting reviews. You are proposing to surrender while simultaneously critiquing our methods? We're proposing to participate in your artistic vision while providing the kind of sophisticated audience response that your work merits, Castellanos explained. Think of it as conquest through collaborative artistic dialogue. Vorthak began, then stopped. Something about the conversation had moved completely beyond his training in aesthetic warfare. I am not certain how to proceed. That's perfectly understandable, Castellanos said sympathetically. You've created such sophisticated art that it requires equally sophisticated audience participation. Why don't we start with some specific technical questions about your ship design? The way you've managed to make your vessels simultaneously beautiful and terrifying is remarkable. Could you walk us through your aesthetic decision-making process? And somehow Commander Vorthak found himself doing exactly that. For the next 2 hours, he provided detailed explanations of Valdrani Conquest artistry, while the human delegation listened with rapt attention, asked insightful questions, and offered thoughtful commentary on his aesthetic choices. It was, he realized with growing alarm, the most satisfying artistic discussion he had ever experienced. When Dr. Castellanos finally announced that the human delegation needed to return to Earth to process their aesthetic experience and prepare their formal response, Commander Vorthak realized that he had somehow spent an entire afternoon discussing art theory instead of receiving a surrender. Dr. Castellanos, he said as the humans prepared to depart, what will be the nature of your formal response? We're going to need more time to properly appreciate the full scope of your artistic achievement, Castellanos replied. 72 hours isn't nearly enough to provide the kind of detailed analysis your work deserves. We'll need at least several weeks to prepare a response that matches the sophistication of your presentation. Several weeks? At minimum, Castellanos confirmed. We're planning to convene an international conference of entertainment industry professionals, academic critics, and artistic theorists to properly evaluate your performance. This is too important to rush. Commander Vorthak stared at her. You are going to hold an academic conference about our invasion? About your artistic achievement, Castellanos corrected. Commander, you've created something unprecedented here. The first genuinely successful fusion of conquest and performance art that deserves serious scholarly attention. As the human delegation returned to their shuttle, Commander Vorthak stood in the center of his bridge, surrounded by the most aesthetically perfect invasion force in galactic history, and realized that somehow his conquest had been transformed into a cultural exchange program. Sir, Cultural Coordinator Praxis whispered, what are your orders? Vorthak looked at the tactical display, where Earth hung in space like a small blue challenge to everything he thought he understood about aesthetic warfare. Send a message to Imperial Theater Command. Tell them we may have encountered a problem with our performance methodology. 6 weeks later, when the Valdrani Star Empire announced its withdrawal from the Sol system, the official reason given was completion of cultural exchange objectives. The unofficial reason, whispered through the corridors of the Imperial fleet, was that Commander Vorthak had filed a report recommending extensive revision of Conquest artistry protocols due to unprecedented audience participation complications. The humans, for their part, declared the entire affair the most successful first-contact cultural exchange in galactic history, and began offering consulting services to other civilizations interested in aesthetic appreciation of superior force projection. The International Conference on Valdrani Conquest Artistry became an annual event, with Commander Vorthak eventually serving as a keynote speaker. Dr. Castellanos' final report to the Terran Cultural Exchange Office concluded with an observation that would be quoted in artistic theory courses for generations. It turns out that the most effective way to defeat conquest through aesthetic intimidation is to respond with sophisticated artistic appreciation. Who knew that applause could be such an effective defensive strategy? The Valdrani Star Empire quietly began developing new conquest methodologies that included extensive audience analysis and critic-proofing techniques. The updated manual contained an entire section dedicated to managing sophisticated audience responses, and strongly recommended psychological preparation for the possibility that target civilizations might respond to aesthetic intimidation with detailed artistic critique. They never again attempted to conquer a civilization that had developed professional entertainment criticism.